All right, greetings. We're sort of back to the rambling GM segment here, and the last segment in defense of rules-heavy games. We got a comment from Valerie Bondarchik 231. I found I'm bothered by minigame rules, especially when the world behaves differently depending on which mode you are in. D&D 4th edition brought this feeling especially strongly, and I love D&D 4e's combat system. It just feels to me the minigames belong in computer RPGs and not tabletop games. I'm trying non-combat skill challenges in my current game, and they sort of work, and they sort of annoy me. I'm not sure yet. So let's talk about minigames, right? Because I did mention subsystems, minigames, and I'm going to use those terms pretty much interchangeably. And to some degree, I think they're interchangeable enough. So I think we're going to just use them interchangeably. So what is a minigame in my mind? A minigame is, honestly, I have a definition, it just blew away. A minigame is a subsystem added to the base mechanics, theoretically, to make the game feel more like the thing you are simulating. It doesn't have to. I think that one thing which would differentiate between a good minigame and a bad minigame is how much it accomplishes making it feel good, like the thing you're trying to do. And I think it deviates from the base game flow, or it's a different flow entirely. Now, this helps if your game has a base flow or a base mechanic. So, for instance, something like Hero, where everything is skill checks, or something like Rune Bear. Rune Bear is another game with a pretty strict, solid base flow, right? And the base flow is everything's an opposed D12 roll, right? You pick a lock, GM sets the difficulty, rolls a die, you roll a die, add your skill. Did you get higher or equal to? Yes, succeed, no, fail. Everything in the game can be boiled down to that in the basic back and forth. Advanced D&D is a little harder. Advanced D&D really is almost made up of mini games. There really isn't that base game mechanic. I would argue there's a base game flow, and that's the expedition flow in the dungeon, right? You're walking through the dungeon, you have a certain amount of feet you walk in a turn, you're mapping, you're going, right? That whole back and forth, and then combat hits, and that's a different game entirely. And so I count combat in a lot of ways as a minigame in a lot of systems. In Rune Bearer it is, right? So you're not just rolling opposed d12s. You are, but you've also added now damage, wounds, exhaustion, flanking position, like the whole spiel. There's a chapter on it. So it's sort of a subsystem that only uses, in part, the base game flow, which is opposed d12 rolls. So I sort of count the combat in most systems sort of counts as a minigame. You could just handle all combats with opposed D12 rolls. Done. And just, bam, okay, you guys roll and you get a number of, right? You could easily just say, you roll your skill and he'll roll his skill and whoever does that wins and the most wins. You could easily make a system which is just, okay, make a roll. And then it wouldn't break the base flow. It would be part of that base flow. But we don't. We actually go into rounds, and it takes a while. It takes time to resolve. Our last night we played, it was all combat last night. We had 2 fights with packs of wild predators who were roaming the hills, and that took most of the night, actually. If at all the night, frankly. So a subsystem that adds more texture to the rules in order to get closer to simulating the thing that you are simulating, and it deviates a little bit from the base game flow or adds to it or creates a different flow, and that's minigame. So, like I said, I count combat as one. One that I love back in the day was Gamma World. When you found an artifact, when you wanted to identify it, there was no skill check for this. you actually put a little piece or a coin on a little flow chart based on the complexity of and type of device. And then you roll a d10. And then based on what you rolled, you would go to a different part in the flow chart. And some parts in the flow chart are you unlock a thing that you can do with this device you found. And another is, oh, you caused a mishap, the thing blows up or it explodes or you misfire it or whatever. And some of them loop back on themselves. And so there's this little flow chart that you move the coin through and keep rolling. And I think your intelligence might have influenced the roll here. But it was not any other game mechanic that you had in Gamma World, which, again, Gamma World was very much like old D&D in that it had very little in terms of a base game mechanic. Everything was its own bespoke mechanic. Hacking in most cyberpunk games tends up being a minigame. Usually, look, it tends up. I have no idea what I just said. Ends up being a minigame, right? So the hacker has a deck, and the deck has programs he can load, and those programs are like his weapons against different rooms in the ice, and in the net, right? And he goes to each node, and the node might have anti-intrusion software, and then he does some rolls, and so on. That's a hacking minigame. That is not, the rest of the party is doing their own thing, and he's off playing absolutely a totally separate game. Now, I tend to like mini games. I think I'll tell you where. Now, I think you can have bad mini games, and I think you can. Yeah, I think they can harm a game more than help a game. But I think in general, it's a good idea. A well thought out mini game can really be an addition. So I'll tell you one super simple one that I did. We were doing a fantasy western, right? So you had mages and 6 shooters and the whole shebang. And of course, because it's a western, at some point someone's drawing against someone else, right? You have a showdown and you're drawing. And yeah, I had a skill fast draw. And we could have just said, okay, you fast draw versus him. Done. And that's it, right? That person gets the first shot. And you could, and we did for a while. And I thought, man, this is a little dull for the whole showdown. The whole standing there, eyeing each other up, and then drawing. Really, all comes down to a single roll. That sort of sucked. So what we did is we broke it out into phases. There was like a pre-showdown phase where you could intimidate or analyze your opponent, right? And you had different skills that could play in, which would give you a bonus in the next phase. And the next phase was a bidding. So literally, you would bid and you would essentially bid your accuracy to go faster. So you'd say, I'm willing to take a -2 to hit. And keep in mind, right, these are stationary targets. They're not that far away. It's not super hard to hit that guy. So you could say, okay, my fast draw is 13. I think he's faster than me. Let me bid 3 accuracy, and now my fast draw is a 16. So you bid accuracy. And then the other guy could bid accuracy. And I don't recall, at this point, it was years ago, whether it was hidden. I think it was hidden. You just put it down, and you bid your accuracy, and then you took out, and you say, oh, okay. Then you rolled fast draw with your pluses. The person who succeeded by more got to shoot first at the penalty. The second guy, again, if he was capable of shooting, then got to shoot. So, and if the first guy missed, well, then the second guy gets a clear shot. And if the first guy hits, he might injure or kill the first dude, and so on. So it was a mini game. And it made showdowns feel better because now it wasn't just a single roll and you're done. It truly was something that the characters actually partook in. It became a little bit of a game, and you you could analyze them and go, well, okay, right? Or I know how much he's bidding because I made my int check or whatever. And then you reveal, right? And then you roll. So that made that a little more exciting. It made it closer to the thing. It made it closer to how we thought that these showdowns, these two gunslingers facing off on the street, Main Street, how that should feel. And so I think that's where I sort of got sold on the concept of minigames. And I've used them throughout all the campaigns, usually on side things. Like, we don't have a lot of just plain on now. So, for instance, we have some mini games in the main game. Like I said, I mentioned in the last video. So, traveling is a mini game, and instead of just going, okay, we fudge it, which we can, but if we don't, we go, okay, who's your navigator? That's a navigate check. Who's your pathfinder? Who are your scouts? And each of those has a separate role in the party, in the travel. If you fail one of those roles, there's a chart for a mishap, which might lead you to be lost or ambushed, or you fall into hazard, right? That whole thing. And so that's a minigame. And we do that as you go each day. And again, it makes traveling, gives it more texture, right? It gives it something that's not just, hey, just roll, right? Someone said, I saw a video and they put this up, and it was in a context I didn't necessarily agree with, but I thought the actual base sentiment was very clever. It's like, if everything comes down to a D20 roll, then everything feels the same. And I agree with that. If everything's just I like having a base mechanic that flows through the game. I do. I don't like where everything's its own bespoke mechanic, and most games don't do that anymore, frankly. That is a very, very old, that's old-timey design, right? Horse and buggy design. Most games have like a basic mechanic that they use, and that flows through the rest of the mechanics. But if everything comes down to an opposed D12 roll or a D20 roll, then picking a lock and convincing someone and sneaking past someone and hitting someone, right, all feel the same. And sometimes we want those to feel different. I will totally tell you. And I'll tell you what super convinced me that I'm righteous here. I'm correct. I actually don't think I am. I think you should do whatever you need to do and make your game your game. But in my game, I'll tell you what. So, the previous campaign to this one was superheroes. It was freshman high schoolers in a super high school, right? It was My Hero Academia meets Harry Potter meets, the Avengers, effectively. Love that game, by the way. Love it. It got a little goofy as we went because it was also a time travel story, and you should never do a freaking time travel story if you're smart. But we were, and so they're in a time, right, time loop. And that has nothing to do with any of this. But I'll tell you the mini game, which, so I had in preparation for this game, I read Strixhaven, right? Because Strixhaven is the D&D 5th edition. Hey, let's do Harry Potter in 5th edition. And here's the problem. So I read through Strixhaven, didn't play it. I don't play a lot of 5e anymore. I don't run 5e. One of these days I should, but I don't. I read through Strixhaven, and what bothered me about Strixhaven was it felt like every other D&D campaign book. You went from encounter to encounter, and stuff happens, and there's some checks to make, and a combat to have, and then you're on to the next encounter. And that's really about it. And nothing about it really felt like they were in school. And they did have tests, and those tests all came down to, yeah, you can study and get a +1 or whatever. And then you roll your blah check, your herbalism check, or your whatever arcana check, and you passed, yay, right? That's it. That's the whole thing. And none of that felt like school. And I understand that that's not the point. The point is this other side adventure you're having. And yet, you just didn't get, I did not get from Strixhaven that same sort of great, I don't know what I'm doing here, by the way. I didn't get that texture of, of that school, of the, like the Harry Potter sort of vibe where they're in school and they have to skip class to do a thing, right? I just didn't get any of that. The teachers are looking for us because we broke curfew again. Like, I just did not get that whole thing. So when we did this game, I effectively made I totally got rid of the leveling system that I was considering. And by the way, I don't know that I won't use a leveling system. And we literally tied leveling and leveling up to the 9-week terms. So every term you had classes, and you would so you had 7 classes here. You see science, math, English, social studies, art, music, activities, and gym. You would assign stats to them, 6, 5, 4, 4, 3, 2, which is your inclination for those classes. And then as you went through the weeks of school, you would then roll a die for each and then add that to it. And your final grading scale was this. And so you might roll on art and music, you put a 2 in there, and then you roll a 1, and now, oof, you look like you're going to fail art and music, man. What are you doing? Right? And so you'll see here, after week 2, Scott's had some time to complete some assignments, take his first art quiz. He rolls again for each class and totals his results, and you'll see that he's getting C's, an F in art and music, and a B in gym. And you might go, well, that sort of sucks. And you go, well, yes, it does suck. So what you do is you then effectively have activities. And I really got to stop the 2-column bullcrap because it then puts so much mental energy on formatting stuff that, anyway, that's totally a side note. So then you could choose each week. So you had 8 weeks. So we did 8 weeks. You did 4 weeks and 4 weeks. So you had 8 weeks and effectively like a midterm kind of concept, and then 4 weeks and then a final. So each week you have to choose an activity that represents how you're spending your time in between classes. You could train, study, socialize, patrol, work. People came to me with custom ones like, I want to be gaming the entire time, and so on. And each one then affected your grades. So you could train and re-roll your gym a die on your gym grade, or you could socialize and re-roll your art and music 1 die on your art and music grade, or patrolling, going out, right, takes their toll. You rolled a D6 -1, or we actually upped it to a D8 -1, I think, at some point, and reduced that many classes by 1 point. You could work if you had a job, which again would reduce classes, and so on and so forth, right? So you literally would sit there each week as we went in class. I go, okay, this is week 1 or week 2 or whatever, and we're going to have an adventure, but first you got to tell me what you're doing for that week. And some people go, I'm going to train, I'm going to patrol, and so on, and they would do their grades, and then we would have our adventure. And as you did all the things, you trained, studied, socialized, patrol, you'd write down what you did each week. And at the end of 4 weeks, you got like a mini level up. And we won't do exam week yet. Once every 4 weeks have passed, you roll in the rewards table for each activity you completed, note the results, and you choose one. So for instance, studying could get you plus to wit, plus to reflex, or power. Training gave you muscle skill, toughness, hit points, etc., right? Plus to combat, socializing, everything gave you different sets of possible rewards. And you'd roll on each thing you did. So if you trained a lot, you would have a lot of physical things to pick and a lot of combat-y things to pick. If you patrolled, you would have a lot more effective combat things to pick, typically, because you're out on the streets, right? Beating up criminals. Or you could get something like city knowledge. Actually, where is yeah, there's patrolling. Yeah, I see. I totally messed up the formatting of these. I got to fix these. Right? You get fighting. You get all the stats. You could get power points to spend on your powers. You get city knowledge. You get knowledge of the city streets and neighborhoods, or streetwise, or tactics. Right? So you get potentially those things. Studying is a lot more sort of laid back. You get maybe +1 wit, reflex, since reflex in that game was like an awareness thing. Power, you could get your skills, your proficiencies up. You could find blueprints for a gadget or a spell. Bookworm, you can reroll any studying reward, 10 power points, etc. So you had all these different things. And that's how we did leveling. And there was a mini game. And by God darn it felt like they were in school. Like they were worried. And at the end of the term, and the climax typically of our stories, and you'll see gaming. Someone did, they said, oh, gaming, I want to do gaming. And you reduce your classes like you did if you were patrolling. But then you get potentially some combat-y stuff. Skill up, some stats there, online friends, like, right? Different stuff. And people typically would pick, obviously, something that they wanted to go for because they had certain stats they were shooting for. But also, like, this was a kid who was like energy drink, late night gamer, that kind of thing. So he picked this and did that. So it was fun. We had a good time. And at the end of the 9 weeks, so after you get 2 of these 4-week mini rewards, we would go for exam week. And that would typically be a finale of that sort of segment of the campaign. There'd be a big bad or something going on. And then the characters would then have one last week, one last set of tokens they could spend to try to up their grades, but also try to solve the big bad, for which they would have to spend their tokens to like go, oh, we're gonna go out to go to the warehouse to go meet the contact to talk about. Well, that's a token for everybody. I only have 7 because you have 7 days in it. Okay, I really need to give a math grade up though. Can I spend 2 of these to right, and so on. And that was the interplay. And then largely for as many A's as they got last term, they could up one of their stats by 1, as long as they maintained that grade. And then we just started again the next 9 weeks, and then the next 9 weeks, and so on. And that was a mini game. And that has very little to do with, right? It ties into what they're doing, but it made the leveling and made their schoolwork pertinent. And it was really cool actual mini game. And I don't know how I would do this in a game, a Supers game that wasn't built around school, but I would definitely consider sort of doing that as a, and don't get me wrong, like you could, and then you could tie a lot of stuff to this, which we did, right? A little, not a ton, but we could tie a little bit of stuff to this. Like, could have encounters. Oh, you're socializing. Well, if you're socializing, then you could have these encounters, and maybe we roll on a table and you go, oh, you meet April and May, and they're right, or you meet these characters, or you I don't know, you're gaming. You run afoul of the Korean gaming StarCraft guild. They're coming for you. That kind of thing. And so you could again add to your campaign like that, but it all was based around this mini game, and this all came from, wow, Strixhaven is boring. That's sort of where we ended up. So so I think the pros of mini games are to make the game feel like the thing. I will put up my block here so you're not staring at my desktop. To change a pace, right? Again, if everything is a d20 roll, then everything feels about the same, but you get a little change of pace. Again, when you're in that back and forth of exploration and the GM says roll for initiative, that's exciting. And so I do appreciate that, the ability to do that. And again, and you can have crap mini games, and we'll talk about that in a second. And you could add, there's a little bit of player skill that you could add if you wanted to, right? When we do gambling games, typically I let the characters roll their gambling skill only to manipulate the game that we're actually going to play. So if we were doing poker, you might roll and you get some chips to redraw cards, maybe. That kind of thing. But there is still an underlying skill to doing it. And some of these are brilliant. I love the Game World item identifier. I love casting in Deadlands was a great mini game. And I think, like I said, it can definitely add a little bit of joy to the game and like a player skill. Now that could be a con. Maybe the guy's not good at poker, and he should be because he's a 8-time poker champ. He's playing a 8-time poker champion or something with telepathic powers. How can you not be good at poker? Why are you making this guy fit? And in that case, I think you would either have to give him whatever advantage in the game you felt was appropriate, or just forego the game. If you think it's ruining the chance, but you always have to make that decision. In conversation, when you make someone who's doing a persuasion check on a guard talk their way out of it for real, that's sort of a mini game, right? That's a different, it's role playing. Well, sure, but you're making the guy do the thing. And we had, in this game, we had a character who was very charismatic or whatever, and the guy playing him wasn't that good of a talker in game. Like, he wasn't that. So we would largely just defer to the role, of course. And I think you can do that and make that choice with mini games. If you're not good at playing the flicking mini game that I made up for lock picking, then you don't have to do it. But that does bring up other cons and things I think that might make these games feel crappy. Like, they might be complicated. They might take a lot of time, which I don't think you want. I think these games should be fairly short. I think they should be fairly simple. I think they should tie into the rules of your game, the base game, instead of totally circumventing the rules of the base game. So they have to interlock somehow, right? So if I'm going to make you play poker at a table for money in game, and you have gambling, I need that to interlock. So you get to roll your gambling skill, and then that's going to give you some advantage in the game. Absolutely, 100%, you got to do that. I think the other problem that you're going to run into is who can play. I hate hacking mini games in Cyberpunk game sets, because you typically then take that character out and he's doing a thing. And that thing is long and complicated and with its own set of rules. And he's the only one experiencing it, and everybody else is sitting there twiddling their thumbs. Typically. Now there's, I'm sure there's a perfect system which does this perfectly well, but all the ones that I have seen so far, albeit old, they're old. The old Cyberpunk game, not the new one, but the old one from Talsorian Games, Iron Crown Enterprises, Cyberspace, old versions of Shadowrun. Hacking was a thing. And you went and you had my deck, and my deck has program space, and that's like my equipment list, and I can go into different nodes, and then I have to encounter, Cyber Hero in Hero System, same sort of deal. Everything was almost you're doing a mini combat, a mini dungeon adventure, but that was you, and everybody else sat on their hands. I don't like that. You got to make these games short. They should be games that everybody can participate in if you can manage it. Or super short. Like I said, the gunslinging game took seconds, right? What's your initial skill check? Oh, I'll try to intimidate him. Okay, roll it. Ooh, you succeeded by 2. You're gonna put, you get 2 extra points when you do the next thing. Okay, bid 1, 2, 3, and reveal. And now we're shooting, and it should be quick. So yeah, or like I said, like the school thing, everybody was in on. Everybody was participating in finals. Everybody every week was excited to go and say, well, I'm going to train this week, right? Or every 4 weeks. It was really great because everybody then got their roles and got to level up a little bit, their mini level up. And then after the 9 weeks was the real level up. And they actually got to spend the points that they had accrued and so on and get new powers, etc. And so that was sort of fun. So yeah, so I'm generally a proponent of subsystems and mini games within limits, and right, I want the game, right, it's got to bring us closer to simulating the thing, or at least feel like it. It's got to be interesting, it's got to be short, people have to be able to participate. I think if you stick with that, I think you actually add to the game instead of detract. So tell me what you think, or if you have any mini games that you enjoy in your system or subsystems that you enjoy. And this one will be short, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks. Bye-bye.